The air in Ouagadougou was thick with anticipation. Inside the austere presidential office, Ibrahim Traoré sat alone, his eyes fixed on a single piece of paper resting on his mahogany desk. It was hand-delivered by a French attaché an hour ago, bearing the seal of the Élysée Palace. It was a warning, a politely worded ultimatum from President Emmanuel Macron. The letter claimed to reaffirm France's historical partnership with Burkina Faso and express concern over recent nationalizations, hostile rhetoric, and disruptions to joint resource projects. The language was diplomatic, but Traoré knew what it really meant. Step back or be stepped on. He leaned back in his chair, fingers interlocked over his chest. Outside the window, the golden dusk washed over the streets of Ouagadougou, where children played, markets buzzed, and men and women clung to dignity like a sacred flag, despite poverty, sabotage, and the shadows of a neo-colonial legacy that refused to die. A knock broke his silence. "Enter," he called. Aminata Keita stepped in, his national security chief, a woman as sharp as obsidian and twice as unbreakable. "You read it?" she asked. "Yes. And your answer?" Traoré folded the letter neatly and slid it into the drawer. "We write history, not surrender notes." 3 months earlier, Traoré had announced sweeping reforms, the cancellation of French mining contracts that siphoned billions, a full audit of military pacts with European powers, and a new deal with East African partners to co-develop solar energy grids. Burkina Faso was breaking free from its French protectorate in disguise status. Traoré knew the cost would be high. What he didn't expect was how fast the retaliation came. French-funded NGOs shuttered offices overnight. Several French military advisors withdrew for security reasons. Internet bandwidth was throttled mysteriously across the capital. And now Macron's letter. Aminata pulled up a chair. "We intercepted chatter on French diplomatic lines last night," she said. "They're not just pressuring you with words. They've begun lobbying ECOWAS members to isolate us economically. Let them try. They're calling an emergency summit in Dakar next week. Topic: unconstitutional resource reallocations in West Africa, which is code for Traoré won't kneel." She nodded. "You'll be invited, but it's a trap. If you don't attend, you'll be painted as rogue. If you do, you'll be outnumbered." Traoré smirked. "Then I suppose we accept the invitation." 7 days later, the sun beat down over Dakar's coastline as armored convoys lined the boulevard near the African Unity Convention Center. Delegations from across West Africa arrived, flanked by UN officials and foreign diplomats. Banners read, "Building stability together." But beneath the surface, the summit was anything but stable. Inside the grand marble chamber, Macron had already taken his seat at the special observer podium, flanked by economic advisors and security attachés. He wore his trademark half-smile, polished and unreadable. Traoré entered alone, no entourage, no military display, just the Burkinabe flag pinned to his chest, and the quiet confidence of a man who knew the weight of each step he took. Macron turned slightly as Traoré passed by. Their eyes met. The French president offered a slight nod. Traoré returned none. Let him blink first. The summit began with scripted pleasantries, long speeches about regional unity, development strategies, climate commitments. But soon the true agenda emerged. A senator from Côte d'Ivoire stood. "We must address the destabilizing behavior of certain member states, those who unilaterally cancel international agreements and disrupt economic cohesion." Another voice from Niger echoed, "Burkina Faso's abrupt rejection of European aid frameworks and militarized border posturing pose a danger to all of us." Then a representative from ECOWAS looked directly at Traoré. "Mr. President, do you deny that your recent actions risk plunging West Africa into chaos?" The chamber grew still. Traoré rose slowly. "No," he said. "I don't deny it." Gasps. Macron leaned forward slightly. "I accept that what I've done has disrupted comfort. But let me ask you this. Who was comfortable before? Was it the farmers drinking poisoned river water from foreign-owned mines? Was it the mothers whose sons died protecting convoys of uranium they'd never benefit from?" He scanned the room. "We were colonized with guns, and now we are governed with loans. France says it is a friend. Then why do our riches leave faster than our children? Why are our soldiers trained by those who arm the very groups we fight? Macron shifted uncomfortably. I am not your enemy, Traore continued, but I will not be your puppet. Burkina Faso chooses dignity, and if that makes me rogue, so be it. The room broke into murmurs. Some delegates nodded discreetly. Others scribbled frantically. Macron whispered to one of his aides. Traore locked eyes with him. This was not just a summit, it was a standoff. The summit hall buzzed with murmurs as Traore took his seat again. Macron was no longer smiling. His advisors shuffled nervously, whispering into Bluetooth headsets and scribbling notes. In less than 3 minutes, Traore had undone months of quiet diplomacy and careful posturing. But he had done more than that. He had exposed a fault line, one that could crack open the whole facade. In the lobby during a recess, a French diplomat approached Traore quietly. "Monsieur le Président," he said, bowing slightly. "President Macron would like a private word. 10 minutes. Off the record." Traore didn't answer immediately. He looked at the man, tailored suit, perfect French accent, eyes too polite to be trusted. "Tell him I'll come," Traore finally said, "but not to a private room. Let it be in the garden terrace. Open air." The sun had begun to dip when the two leaders finally stood face to face outside, away from the cameras. Macron wore a faint trace of amusement behind his neutral tone. "You've made quite the impression," Macron said. "Some say you're the voice of a new Africa." "I didn't come for applause," Traore said, his voice firm.
"Oh.
I came to make it clear we will no longer beg for what is ours." Macron nodded slightly. "You're passionate, idealistic, but let me be direct. What you've done could cost you your economy, your alliances, even your presidency. I'm aware." Macron leaned in. "What if I told you there's another way? We could restructure the mining contracts, make them more equitable. Quietly, you gain credit at home. We keep things stable. No need for escalations." Traore's eyes locked onto his pog. "More equitable still means you own the mine, and we die near it." Macron sighed, trying another tone. "Do you think China or Russia will treat you better? They'll take your resources just the same, only without the pretense of partnership. We are not choosing a new master," Traore said coldly. "We are choosing freedom." A silence lingered. Then Macron tried the final card. "We've intercepted chatter from your eastern provinces. There are militant groups you haven't been able to contain.
You need intelligence, drones, support."
We can help with that, but help requires trust. And your definition of trust," Traore said slowly, "is control." Macron's jaw twitched. The mask slipped for just a second. The two men stood, staring, silent. Traore broke it. "If you want to negotiate, bring transparency. If you want to threaten me, make it public." Without another word, he turned and walked away. Macron didn't call him back. That night, back in his hotel, Traore sat with Amanada and Foreign Minister Diarra. The lights were dim, curtains drawn. Traore was quiet outside, but tension filled the room. Macron made his move. Traore said. Amanada tapped on her tablet. "We've confirmed the French have increased drone surveillance near our eastern border, possibly as leverage. They're watching the rebels," Diarra said.
"No," Traore corrected. "They're watching us and waiting."
Diarra leaned forward. "If this escalates, we need guarantees. Do we have regional allies that will stand with us?" Amanada answered first. "Guinea and Mali are sympathetic. But no one wants a direct standoff with France. Not unless we shift the narrative." Traore nodded. "Then we make this about more than Burkina Faso." He stood and walked toward the window. "We make it about African dignity." 2 days later, Traore called a press conference from a small courtyard near the French consulate in Dakar. The media expected a typical closing statement. Instead, Traore delivered a speech that would go viral within hours. "We have been told our stability depends on submission, that our survival requires permission, that our dignity is a favor granted, not a birthright." He paused. "No more." He raised a folder marked Classifia. Burkina Faso. This contains records of resource extractions, tax avoidance, and backroom deals signed over 2 decades, under the guise of partnership. This is not cooperation, it is exploitation in a suit and tie. A camera panned across stunned journalists. I do not say this to divide, Traore continued. I say this so we can begin again, with truth. That night, clips of the speech flooded social media. Hashtags like #Traore speaks truth and #Africa, not for sale, trended across Francophone Africa. Macron's office released a muted response, calling for measured discourse and accusing Traore of grandstanding. But in the halls of power, the chessboard had shifted. A continent was beginning to watch, and so was the world. The atmosphere in Paris was growing tense. Inside the Élysée Palace, President Emmanuel Macron sat in his strategy room, his advisors circling him like satellites around a dimming star. On the screen before them, social media clips of President Ibrahim Traoré's Dakar speech, now translated and subtitled in over a dozen languages. He's not just a populist, one advisor muttered. He's a movement, and he's costing us influence across West Africa. Another added, Guinea is now reconsidering 2 major French infrastructure deals. Mali's military council is already citing Traoré's rhetoric in their speeches. This isn't just Burkina Faso anymore. Macron leaned back in his chair. What do we still have in play? He asked. Control over regional lending leverage via the West African Economic and Monetary Union. Sanctions could be threatened if he continues this path. Too obvious, Macron snapped. We'll be accused of economic bullying. A pause. Then another advisor, one from internal intelligence, spoke carefully. There's another option. Indirect. We can fund non-state actors in the East. Nothing provable, just enough to destabilize his border and shift public opinion back home. Paint him as weak on security. Macron didn't respond immediately. Then he looked up. Do it. In Ouagadougou, days after returning from Dakar, President Traoré could feel the shift in the air, not from within his administration, but from the ground itself. His military reports were grim. 2 villages raided last night near the Niger border, Keita reported. Same tactics as before. Well-armed insurgents, minimal looting, maximal psychological damage. Civilians? He asked. 10 dead, several women abducted, livestock torched. He slammed his fist on the desk. Same group. We're not sure, she said. They flew no colors, but the ammo casings matched NATO supply models. That detail was enough. It wasn't just an insurgency. It was a message. Later that evening, Traoré convened a war council in the underground strategy chamber beneath the Ministry of Defense. Only his closest military commanders, intelligence operatives, and Foreign Minister Diarra were present. I want every drone, every satellite ping, every human intel source focused on the Eastern Corridor, he said. If there's a foreign hand in this, I want it cut off. Diarra, cautious, raised a concern. Sir, if France is arming proxy groups, any public accusation must come with undeniable proof. Otherwise, we risk international backlash. Traoré nodded. Then we gather proof. Quietly, Keita stepped forward. There's someone who might help. He's a French intelligence defector, used to work in Sahel operations, until he vanished last year. We believe he's hiding in Conakry, under a fake identity. Name? Jean-Louis Mercier. He handled off-the-books asset coordination for French missions in the region. If anyone knows how arms are moving, it's him. Traoré didn't hesitate. Send a team. Discreet. Bring him to me. 4 days later, in a small safe house outside Ouagadougou, Jean-Louis Mercier sat across from President Traoré, a thin cigarette burning in his left hand. His beard was overgrown, and his eyes carried the exhaustion of too many secrets. I didn't expect you'd find me, he said. We have good reasons to, Traoré replied. You know why I'm here. Mercier chuckled darkly. I know more than you want to. Then start talking. The Frenchman leaned forward. France isn't scared of losing Burkina Faso. They're scared of losing the illusion. If one country breaks the cycle and thrives without them, others will follow. That's what they're fighting. Not you, your example. He exhaled smoke. They are using Group E6. You won't find them in any official file. But they operate under a black budget. Their orders? Destabilize through tribal fractures, weaken local faith in centralized leadership. Your target number 1. And how are the weapons getting in? Port of Abidjan, disguised as agricultural equipment, rerouted through a logistics firm called Alteralog. Traore said nothing for a moment. Then he stood. Would you testify? Mercier blinked. Testify, publicly. I'll give you full protection. You'd put me in front of cameras? I'll put you in front of history. The announcement shocked the world. A press conference from Ouagadougou. President Traoré at the podium, standing beside Jean-Louis Mercier, former French operative turned whistleblower. The cameras flashed. Journalists screamed questions. Mercier laid it out in perfect, painful French. The covert funding, the disguised shipments, the strategic destabilization. This is not peacekeeping, Mercier declared. It is sabotage disguised as concern. France immediately denied everything. Macron's office accused Mercier of being a disgruntled ex-agent and called Traoré's move a dangerous stunt. French media ran hit pieces on Traoré's background, questioning his education, his battlefield promotions, even his sanity. But it was too late. The world had seen it, and in Africa, something shifted. The fallout was immediate. Within 48 hours of Mercier's testimony, African news outlets across the continent ran back-to-back specials titled The Sabotage Files. Talk shows debated it. University students in Mali and Senegal marched with posters of Ibrahim Traoré beside words like dignity, sovereignty, and Africa rises. Editorials from Kenya to Cameroon asked the same question. If Traoré is right, how much more are we not being told? In France, the official narrative was under siege. Protests broke out in Paris outside the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. A group of intellectuals, African and French, published an open letter demanding transparency on France's involvement in West African militarized zones. The Élysée was shaken, but Traoré was not finished. At the African Union headquarters in Addis Ababa, a special summit was convened. It was originally scheduled to discuss trade tariffs, but after Traoré's whistleblower revelation, it was repurposed. Now, it would determine whether Africa was ready to stand up for one of its own. President Traoré arrived with a lean team, Foreign Minister Diarra, Aminata Keita, and 2 economic advisors. He wasn't there for theatrics. He came to realign history. The conference hall was massive. A circle of flags, marble floors, interpreters in every language from Arabic to Zulu. Dozens of heads of state sat in silence as Traoré took the floor. He didn't bring notes. I stand before you not as a victim, he said, but as a man who refuses to pretend anymore. He gestured around him. We speak of unity, but act in isolation. We preach sovereignty, but accept policy dictated from embassies in Paris, London, Washington, and Beijing. Is it any wonder our youth flee, our borders burn, and our resources vanish? He paused. France is not the only culprit, but it is the oldest one. Some leaders shifted uncomfortably, others nodded. Burkina Faso is not calling for war, Traoré said. We are calling for a reckoning, for transparency, for trade and aid that doesn't chain us to the past. I ask you, if we let this moment pass, what are we telling the next generation? That we were too afraid to speak, too polite to be free? The chamber fell silent. Then slowly one delegate clapped, then another. Then a standing ovation erupted. The AU passed a resolution within 48 hours. No foreign military intervention or resource extraction may continue in any member state without full public audit and regional review. France was not named directly, but the implication was clear. In retaliation, Macron ordered a freeze on bilateral aid to Burkina Faso and withdrew all military personnel from joint operations in the Sahel. French media lambasted the African Union as playing into Russian and Chinese hands. French diplomats tried to rally ECOWAS to issue sanctions, but this time ECOWAS refused. Mali, Guinea, Niger, and even Chad issued statements in support of Burkina Faso's sovereign right to self-determination. Back in Ouagadougou, Traoré walked through the bustling Grand Marché without security. People greeted him not as a ruler, but as a brother. Fruit vendors handed him mangoes. Old women blessed him in Moure. "You've given us a voice," one young man told him. "We didn't know we could speak until you did." But behind the hope, danger still brewed. Aminata Keita was reviewing fresh intel in her office when the red alert flashed. Encrypted communications from an external server, originating from Casablanca, referenced a phase deux. She burst into the situation room, documents in hand. "They're not done," she told Traoré. "We picked up chatter about a possible covert operation, not military, political. They're going to try to replace you." Traoré's jaw tightened. Inside the government, not directly. They're reaching out to former cabinet members, opposition figures, and media operators. "The plan is to paint you as a dictator, trigger a constitutional crisis, and push for a transitional government, one favorable to Western partnerships. Who's backing it? We don't have names, but the message traffic is in French, too clean to be freelance." Traoré knew what this was. When control couldn't be maintained by diplomacy or force, it would come through disruption and delegitimization. He leaned back, stared at the map of Africa behind his desk, and said, "They want regime change without a coup, a reset without fingerprints." Aminata nodded grimly. "On we stop it now, or it grows roots." Traoré called a secret emergency session with his legal team, loyal parliamentarians, and independent media. They prepared for the coming narrative war. By the next morning, a new campaign launched across Burkina Faso and beyond, eyes wide open. A media initiative, broadcasting every step of the reform process, every audit, every debate, live and raw. Nothing was hidden. Every decision was explained, every budget exposed. In a world of secrecy, Traoré was choosing exposure. "Let them watch," he told Aminata. "Let them see that this government doesn't fear its people. It fears becoming what came before." In Paris, the pressure was reaching a boiling point. President Macron sat in a closed-door session with top advisors and intelligence officials. The backlash from Africa was one thing, but now European allies were growing uneasy. Germany had suspended a joint development initiative with France, citing regional volatility. Belgium's foreign minister had publicly questioned the wisdom of provoking a diplomatic rupture with the African Union. And the most damaging development yet came from within. Le Monde leaked internal memos that revealed the Élysées' knowledge of Group E6 activities and the funding pipelines through Alterolog. The scandal spread like wildfire. Now it wasn't just African social media calling Macron an imperial manipulator. European citizens were too. France blinked. But Ibrahim Traoré wasn't celebrating. In Ouagadougou, the reform campaign was working, but his intelligence teams were intercepting more signs of the phase deux narrative war. Sponsored analyst columns were appearing in European outlets, labeling him a military populist on the brink of autocracy. A British think tank released a piece titled "Burkina Faso, From Liberation to Isolation." Traoré called an emergency media briefing, but this time he invited someone unexpected. A former French journalist turned whistleblower, Camille Durand, who had recently resigned from a top Paris outlet after refusing to run a story smearing the Burkinabe leader. In front of a packed press hall, Camille took the podium. "I was told to rewrite facts," she said, "to omit numbers, exaggerate risks, and frame President Traoré as a threat to democracy. When I refused, I was sidelined. This is not journalism. It is war by narrative." She held up emails, contracts, and invoices tied to firms in Brussels and Marseille, tasked with shaping African perceptions through media soft power. It was dynamite. That evening, Traoré addressed the nation and the world. "They could not defeat us on the battlefield," he said. "So now they seek to defeat us in the mirror, by distorting our reflection." He paused. "Let them distort. We will remain clear." But the final blow didn't come from Traoré or a leak. It came from the streets. In Bamako, Conakry, Niamey, and even Dakar, tens of thousands poured into the streets, carrying signs that read, "We are not colonies." Traore speaks for us. Africa is awake. This was no longer a Burkina Faso crisis. This was a Pan-African awakening. In Addis Ababa, the African Union convened a second emergency session, this time without European observers. After 3 days of debate, they passed the Kigali Protocol, a sweeping agreement among 22 nations to avert and regulate all foreign military presence, freeze all colonial-era mining contracts, pending renegotiation, establish a continental media watchdog group to track foreign disinformation campaigns. The protocol didn't mention France by name. It didn't need to. Everyone knew. Macron finally called. It was a secure line. Early morning in Ouagadougou, Traore answered from his desk, flanked by no one. President Traoré, Macron began, voice measured. Would like to propose a new framework for partnership, one based on transparency, respect, and mutual gain. Traoré paused. I believe that's what I asked for 5 months ago. You had to make it hard. No, Traoré said. I had to make it true. Another silence. Macron exhaled. Let us begin again. Traoré nodded. This time, Africa sets the terms. 2 months later, the world watched history unfold in the heart of Ouagadougou. Under a massive white canopy, set up in Independence Square, delegates from over 30 African nations gathered, joined by envoys from Latin America and Southeast Asia. A banner stretched across the stage read, the Ouagadougou Declaration, Partnership Without Chains. President Ibrahim Traoré stood at the podium in full military dress, red beret firm on his head, the Burkina flag sewn into his sleeve. There were no armed guards behind him, no rehearsed lines, only silence, and then thunderous applause. This wasn't just another summit. It was a turning point. Representatives from the African Union, ECOWAS, and multiple South-South alliances signed the new pact, which included ECOWAS demand that all bilateral aid be reviewed by an independent African oversight, boldest, declaration that any military presence on African soil must receive parliamentary approval, a commitment to continental media literacy education, to counter foreign propaganda, and most importantly, a formal rejection of strategic dependency. As a model of development, France, watching from afar, sent a modest delegation, not with threats or grand speeches, but with notebooks and open ears. President Emmanuel Macron did not attend, but he issued a statement of support. We acknowledge the need for a new era, it read, one not based on memory, but on shared respect. It wasn't an apology, but it was an admission. Later that evening, as the celebrations settled into song and speeches, Traoré stood on a rooftop overlooking the square. Aminata Kitita stood beside him, arms crossed. You changed the game, she said. No, he replied. The people did. She glanced at him. You really believe this lasts? Traoré nodded, but not out of idealism, not because they'll let it, but because we'll defend it. He looked down at the street below, where young people danced and waved flags, where elders sat in chairs under trees, telling stories to grandchildren. We've been told our future is too risky, too rebellious, too uncertain, he said. But I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Aminata smirked. Macron will try again. Maybe not him directly, but someone will. They always do, Traoré said. But now we're ready. 2 weeks later, a small op-ed appeared in an American news outlet. It wasn't on the front page. It wasn't written by a politician. It was penned by a student at the University of Ghana. The world didn't stop spinning when Traoré said no. It turned a little freer, and on a tarmac in Ouagadougou, President Ibrahim Traoré walked unguarded toward a plane bound for Addis Ababa, where he would help finalize the implementation committee of the new Continental Pact. He paused briefly, looked back at the red soil of his homeland, and gave a slight nod, not of goodbye, but of promise.